but I'm going to now turn it over to Joe with the Virginia Outdoor Federation, and he's going to take it from here. And a lot of people are rolling in as we speak, Joe.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Kirk, and thanks to everyone at PWC Relic Room for making this presentation possible. My name is Joe Vilari, and I am the Preserve Manager for the Virginia Outdoor Foundation's Boron Mountains Natural Area Preserve. And I just wanted to take a few moments to introduce our presenters tonight. Summers Cleary is our VOF Preserve Specialist, and Barinaale Dube is our VOF Cultural History Fellow turned Cultural History Interpreter. And before they begin, I just want to provide a little bit of background and qualify some of the bounds of our project thus far. We kicked off our fellowship program this past year, right at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak and the related lockdowns in March 2020. Needless to say, our normal avenues and opportunities of collaboration, networking, and inclusion were greatly minimized. So we still have a lot of work to do in connecting our work here at the Boron Mountains into the larger regional work that has already occurred, especially the work of those involved with the settlement, which is centered around the history of Carver Road, I should say, in Gainesville, Virginia. So if anyone on this presentation happens to be involved on a nearby project, please do reach out to us. We definitely want to highlight and contribute to the larger picture of our shared community. Summers and Barinaale's presentation will spend more time tonight probably talking about processes and approaches rather than getting too bogged down in the finest details of our historical findings. And this is for two reasons. One is that all of our resources can really easily be located on our website and our social media. So if you head there, you can find reports, blog posts, videos, etc., that talk about our history and specifics. And we also just wanted to take the time to highlight how our preserve's diversely peopled past and rich cultural history can better inform our present and guide us in building a more inclusive, complete community hub here at Boron Mountains. Just before moving on, I'd just like to point out that one day others might be looking back at our time here on Earth, much like we are currently looking back into those lives that came before us. And those that have come out to our cultural history hikes may have heard us ask a singular open-ended question. And that is a question that we ask ourselves and that guides most of our work. And that is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? So as you listen to this presentation tonight, please consider that question. Fully understanding it will surely take each of us a lifetime to adequately answer it. And with that food for thought, I'd just like to go ahead and encourage you all to check out the resources online on our website, social media. That's boronmountains.org and at Boron Mountains on IG. We're also on Facebook. You can find us there. Considering our yet to be announced, attending our yet to be announced outdoor COVID safe cultural history presentations that we will be holding this spring, and where we're going to get a lot of local historians out and community members and come listen to the details of our cultural history and also help us fill in those gaps. And lastly, I want to welcome each and every one of you to come out to the preserve and come experience the power of the place for yourself, immerse yourself in our cultural and natural history, and discover and learn with us. And with that, I just want to thank you all, and I hope you enjoy this presentation, and I'm going to give it off to Summers and Barinaale now. Eventually.
All righty, good evening, everybody. It's so great to either see your faces or read your names on WebEx, like Joe said. My name is Barinaale Dube, and I was formerly the Cultural History Fellow for VOF, specifically at the Boron Mountains Natural Area Preserve, but now I've been elevated to Cultural History Interpreter, so that's really exciting. A little bit about my educational background. I am actually currently a student at Howard University. I study economics as a major and classics and Africana studies as a double minor. And so that's a little bit about me. Summers?
Okay. All right. Thanks, Barinaale. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kirk. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in. As mentioned, I am Summers Cleary. I'm the Preserve Specialist with the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And I've been working out of the Boron Mountains Natural Area Preserve for about 2.5 years now. And my educational background is in geospatial analysis and cartography. So I bring this geospatial analytical lens to all of the work that we do at the preserve. And Barinaale and I are really excited tonight to present our presentation, Making His Story Our Story, an ongoing cultural case study from an open air museum. And all right, Barinaale is pulling up our presentation now. So this drone shot here is a photograph that is actually looking down onto our 2,500 acre natural area preserve that we manage and are working to turn into an inclusive open air museum by enabling our visitors to interact with and learn about our natural and cultural histories as they hike through our trail systems, rather than only using the preserve as a recreation site, which has been the trend for many years. And before moving on, I just want to note that while Barinaale and I will be speaking about the Preserve's Cultural History Program in general and some of the case studies that have come out of our work and the efforts we're making to create a more equitable and inclusive space at the preserve, this is not a completed project and it's still very much in the early phases of research and development. So we're here this evening to talk about our journey and have you all join in on this journey and conversation as we move ever forward in our work. We protect a very unique resource, and the particulars that make us a state natural area preserve put our focus squarely on the study and conservation of our natural and cultural holdings, and just as importantly, optimizing the educational potential of these resources and making them available to all of our region's people in honest, open, and empowering ways. So with this, I'll begin the presentation by giving an introduction to the preserve and its resources. Then I'm going to go over an overview of our larger cultural history project. And then Barinaale and I are going to discuss a few case studies that have come out of our work. And then Barinaale is going to be speaking on her work as a fellow and now as a cultural history interpreter and some of the ways that we are working to create an inclusive open air museum environment. All right, so the Boron Mountains are the easternmost mountains in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which places VOF's Preserve as a living laboratory and open-air museum that sits in the backyard of our nation's capital. So you can see in this map here that we're just about 35 miles outside of Washington, D.C., and we're situated halfway between the capital and Shenandoah National Park. We're in especially close proximity to all of D.C.'s surrounding metropolitan areas, as well as Dulles International Airport. So in short, visitors to the preserve are from very diverse backgrounds, and they come for very different reasons, whether this to be going on an independent hike, or join an educational guided hike, participate in community science, or they're simply stopping by on their way in or out of town. We have a unique opportunity because of our location to create a space that hosts and reflects the diverse population around us and visiting us. So here, this next slide, we'll zoom in on a map of the preserve itself. And you can see that it's broken up into 3 main sections, and they're all managed a little bit differently according to the sensitivity of the ecosystems that are present. And I'll go into this in more detail in the next couple of slides, but we have been designated as a state natural area preserve since 2002, and we are just one of over 60 natural area preserves across the Commonwealth of Virginia, with each of these containing some of Virginia's rarest species and most significant natural communities. So most natural area preserves are owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation and managed by their Natural Heritage Division. Some of these preserves are owned privately and others are owned by organizations like Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And the sizes of these preserves range from an acre to 2,500 like our own, and even bigger. And not all of them enable public access, and not every space can be designated as a natural area preserve. Again, this designation is given to areas with the rarest species and most significant natural communities. And because of these sensitivities, we have a strict set of rules and regulations that are in place, and we manage to have a tightly controlled experience due to the fact that we're managing to protect our resources rather than offering recreational opportunities like a park. So with this next slide, we're really managing to be a sociocultural center rather than a recreation center. So we do not allow dogs or bikes or horseback riding or overnight camping or campfires or really any activities that you would commonly associate with outdoor recreation. But we do allow and encourage nature immersion pursuits such as birding or hiking and really just passive interaction with the preserve, as well as research and educational endeavors. So the preserve is broken up into 3 main sections, and the first is the north section, and this has restricted access. And what this means is that it's not open to the general public, but it is open to research and environmental education endeavors. The second section is Jackson Hollow, and this again has restricted access. And the third is the south section, and this is where we facilitate public access every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday year-round. So this map here is looking at our north section trail system. We have about 7 miles of trails that, again, has this tightly managed access that allows us to showcase the pristine cultural and natural holdings to organized groups. So we've had student groups coming out to the north section, as well as the Mycological Association of Washington, Virginia Native Plant Society, and members of the Archaeological Society of Virginia coming out to study our natural and cultural resources here. This is also the site of our historically renovated Creel House, which will soon be the future home of our physical museum collection. So we will be able to facilitate researchers and interested individuals to come and look at and study our physical collections here. The next section is Jackson Hollow, and this is again restricted access. So it is non-public in nature, and it's a little bit different as there's no cultural resources to speak of or traditional hiking trails, but this is our scientific center and biodiversity hotspot. So Jackson Hollow contains a very complex and unique wetland ecosystem and is the site of our trout reintroduction and stream restoration projects, and has our Virginia Outdoors Foundation research outpost, which functions as staff offices and has 2 bedrooms for visiting researchers to stay at while they conduct work on the preserve. So it's really our living laboratory side of the preserve rather than our open air museum side. So this picture here is a drone shot that's looking directly down onto this wetland ecosystem, and you can see in the background here the research outpost. And although this is more the living laboratory side of the preserve, this project has really provided exciting opportunities for us to increase diversity in the outdoors. So as I mentioned, this is the site of our brook trout reintroduction work, and we've been partnering with Northern Virginia schools and the Trout in the Classroom program, and we regularly host a diverse student body and have made special efforts to partner and engage with ESL classrooms and programs that are established to help students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or those that are participating in behavioral reform programs. And last but not least, we have the south section. And again, this is where we have public access and engagement. So we have 6.5 miles of trails that are open to the public every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday throughout the year. So this map here is showing our trail system, which has a number of natural and cultural features right along it that are really exemplary of the breadth of natural and cultural resources that the preserve protects as a whole. So this is really the site where on any given weekend you can come and visit and interact with staff members that are on site, participate in guided hikes that our outreach assistant Becky Conway offers weekly, and really learn about the breadth of work that we do on the preserve. So with this, now that we've had an introduction to our site in its entirety, I'm going to begin talking about our larger cultural history project. So before talking about the research that we have been doing and we are going to be conducting in the future, it's important to note that the Boron Mountains is an intellectual hotspot and has been for many decades. So these papers here, and if you give a click, are just a few examples of the work that have been coming out of the Boron Mountains. But a lot of what has been focused on has been more towards natural history rather than cultural history. So we are turning our sites onto encompassing cultural history within the work that we're doing at the preserve as well. And as we're going on this journey and taking this project under our wing, we have to think about creating a level of accessibility to the work that we're compiling. So this paper here is a pretty good, I think, envisioning of kind of some of the problems that have been coming out of the research that has happened in the preserve in the past. And this is the growing inaccessibility of science, which you can rent or buy for $9 for a short period of time, or you can buy the entire journal for a year for $200. And this isn't the highest level of accessibility that we can achieve at the preserve. So as we move forward in our work, we want to make sure that we are recording the narratives that we are finding out about the mountain and making them freely accessible to our community. So as we think about the cultural history of the mountains, it's important to consider our geographic place, as it has really dictated how our landscape has been utilized throughout time. So if we look at this picture, which is from historic Prince William, looking down onto Thoroughfare Gap, the Beverly Chapman Mill, and the Boron Mountains themselves, if we dissect elements of this photo, we can really understand the regional significance of the Boron Mountains. So in the foreground here, we see Interstate 66 that's traveling east and west through Thoroughfare Gap. And this begins all the way in the east in Washington, D.C. and travels all the way out to Front Royal in the west. So behind 66, you can see this water feature. That is Broad Run, and it actually historically powered this stone structure here, which is the Beverly Chapman Mill that was constructed in the early 1730s. And behind the mill is the Norfolk Southern Railroad, which is also traveling east and west throughout the gap. And then behind this is the Boron Mountains themselves, and we're actually looking down onto the south section of the preserve. And you can kind of see one of our hiking trails just behind the mill there. So Thoroughfare Gap is important as it's a natural gap, and it's not just a modern travel corridor, but has historically been a major travel gap and trade route dating back to prehistoric times. And we know this from archaeological digs that have been conducted by Dr. Mike Johnson, both on the mill site and on the preserve itself. So there's this long history of human use and movement and habitation of the Boron Mountains. But a large draw of this area has been Civil War history. The Beverly Chapman Mill and several landscape features on site were very pivotal points during the Civil War, and this has really seemed to dominate the region's historical focus. And as of 3 years ago, about 90% of the preserve's cultural features and history remained largely unresearched and therefore hidden to our visitors. So we are shifting our focus from one aspect of this region's history to this long-standing anthropogenic use of the region, and hoping to tell the full story of the mountain's diversely peopled past. And that brings us to the Cultural History Project as a whole. So we started this research project in early 2019, and it's involved working with contracted individuals, local school groups, organizations, notably the Archaeological Society of Virginia, going through historical records and conducting genealogical research, working field characterization for our cultural sites. And we've first started this project, we're focusing on sites within the Boron Mountains themselves. And then eventually we will be moving to encapsulate, we first focused on sites within the preserve boundaries, and then we'll be moving to encapsulate sites within the Boron Mountains as a whole. So as I mentioned, the mountains have long been an object of speculation for a range of researchers and naturalists and archaeologists and paleontologists, and the list goes on and they've been involved for a very long period of time. All of this research and archiving of the mountains hasn't really been logged in a single place. So through our project, we're hoping to capture as much information as possible on the mountains and to digitize, modernize, and make this information freely available and as accessible as possible, and also use it to fuel our future work that we're doing in the preserve. So we could use several documents to highlight an example of this, but we'll start with what we're seeing here, a map of the Boron Mountain cemeteries that was created by Howard Thompson for the Virginia Outdoors Foundation and Piedmont Environmental Council in 2003. So Howard Thompson at the time was a local science teacher, and he was interested in the cultural history of the mountains. And he walked transects throughout the entirety of the Bull Run Range and mapped cemeteries as he went along and recorded pertinent information such as their location, their latitude and longitude, as well as names and dates on headstones, presence of field stones or unmarked stones, and then also used local resources and oral histories from local individuals to gather more information about these cemeteries. So this is a wealth of information that has provided a really integral baseline for us to conduct the work that we've been doing. But prior to now, it was held in the private archives of 3 different organizations and wasn't made available to a public audience or a wider public audience. And the format that it was in isn't necessarily approachable for a modern crowd. So this was one of the first steps we took, was modernizing this document and making it available. So here is our updated map of the Boron Mountains cemeteries that contains all the same critical information for our cultural history research, but also includes the boundaries of the preserve. So we have been using this map to streamline search for further cemeteries in the preserve and aid in our fieldwork and archival research work. And we're also making this publicly available so that others can reference it and learn from it as well. And as we've moved through this project, I think it would be amiss not to state that we have encountered many hurdles and some roadblocks along the way. And there has often been an apparent lack of information about a lot of our cultural sites, but this has brought about some interesting conclusions, or rather reflected some features of the region and the people living within Boron Mountains. So we'll illustrate this through an inset of Howard Thompson's Bull Run Cemeteries map on the left-hand side here. And on the right are excerpts from the notes he took on certain cemeteries. So these first 2 cemeteries that are highlighted in green have a lot of information associated with them. So they first have family names, and then there are latitude and longitudes, as well as lots of birth and death dates, in some cases, places where individuals have passed, and then other notes like 16 plus fieldstones. So there's a lot of information to go off of just from this map if you were looking to interpret this site or learn a little bit more about who is buried here. But these next 4 cemeteries that are highlighted in red are actually within the boundaries of the preserve itself, and they contain quite a bit less information. So 2 of them have a family name associated, and then the other 2 have more cryptic names, East End and LJ, and they have the coordinates associated, but there's no other information other than 20 plus fieldstones or the notation of fieldstones present. So this is in no way a reflection of a bias of Howard Thompson, but more a reflection of the socioeconomic disparity of the Bull Run Mountains and how we can see that today in our field work as we're looking at these cemeteries. So this next slide shows 3 different examples of kind of what we're seeing on site as we're doing this field work and how it's providing us this extra information about the people who lived within the Bull Run Mountains. So on the far left here, we have the headstone of George Chapman, who is a wealthy white enslaver whose family owned a lot of land within the Bull Run Mountains in the early 1700s, and they actually constructed the Beverly Chapman Mill that we saw earlier. And this is a pretty austere monolith, and I think one of our most prominent headstones within the entire preserve. And it's actually imported stone from Washington, D.C. So its structure and the fact that it's not local stone paints a picture of higher socioeconomic status for George Chapman that we could kind of infer without looking at historical records. And this is juxtaposed by this next headstone in the middle picture here, and this is the headstone of William Dawson, who died in 1853 at 51 years of age. And this shows quite a bit of difference. So this is actually Bull Run Mountain stone, but it has been hand shaped to be domed at the top and hand inscribed. So this is a reflection of lower socioeconomic status, perhaps for William Dawson, but also that someone took a lot of time and effort and care into memorializing his grave in this way. And the last photo on the far right is a headstone that is the typical, Barinaale, could you zoom to that one? Thank you. Is the typical burial practice that we see throughout the entire Bull Run Mountains as a whole from the early 1700s to the late 1940s. And this is field stone or mountain stone that is turned upright, is not inscribed, not shaped or altered in any way. And this doesn't leave us a lot of clues when we're doing field work as to who is buried here and what their life was like. And it's more, and it is again this affirmation of a reflection that most people living within the Boron Mountains, regardless of ethnic background, were on this lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So as we've been moving through this work, we've been mapping out each cultural site and cemetery as we've gone along. And this map shows all the sites that we've identified to date. And when we say cultural site, this can range from anything from a standing house structure like the Creel house we saw before to a stone foundation on the landscape. And here is an inset map of the North Section cemeteries and cultural history sites. And we've been able to associate family names with most of the sites here, not all of them, so we're still working through this process. But mapping in this way is not just a simple exercise of putting a point on a map or finding its place, but it's an exercise where we can add a new layer of data and a new layer of analysis to the work that we're doing. So we're not only finding a site's location and space, but we're looking at its relationship to its surrounding place. So the relationship of one cultural site to another, or to all the cultural sites in the surrounding area, or to the landscape features that are around it. And perhaps through this, we can find maybe some clues as to why one family settled in one area of the preserve or versus another, and some other information on the life histories like that. So here we have the close-up of the South Section cultural history map. And again, we've been able to associate family names with a lot of our sites. And we've really focused our efforts into the South Section of the preserve, primarily because this is the site where we do have public access. We can, on any given weekend, have visitors visiting most of these sites, whether passively on their own time or attending a guided hike and coming to visit them. So we've been working mostly within this area. So why have we embarked upon this cultural history project? To review, what I've talked about in the past slides, we're utilizing these stories and subsequent stories we uncover along the way to create an inclusive and accessible cultural history experience without compromising our management goals. And we're hoping that we can enable access to the full history of the mountain to all of our visitors through this project. So with this, we're going to go into a few case studies that have come out of this work. So the first, I'll be speaking on the LJ Cemetery project. Then we will celebrate Women's History Month with an oral history, Liza's Secret, Legend of the Boron Mountains. And then Barinaale is going to be speaking on the Hampton Moses Robinson homestead site and a little bit about the Quorum family. So this first project is known as the LJ Cemetery. And before getting into the story, I want to talk a little bit about the background. So this project area is located in the South Section of the preserve, and it's right off of our public trail system, the Fern Hollow Loop. And in this map on the left-hand side, it's within that area circled. So prior to 2019, this cemetery complex, we'll call it this site, was not on our trail map. It was known, but it was thought to be one big site, and it was labeled as the East End Cemetery or the Friends Cemetery. And again, it's one of these cryptic names that's not providing a lot of information for us to go off of. But the LJ Cemetery project as a whole began in a rather serendipitous way. Patrick O'Neill, who is the Nova chapter president of the Archaeological Society of Virginia, and is now our volunteer archaeologist, and he is on the talk tonight, and he actually gave a talk about the preserve a month ago to the RELIC program, and I think I saw that went in the chat, a link to his talk. But Patrick was independently researching into land patents at the time of this project, which was, I think, about late 2019, or late 2018, early 2019. And he was finding land patents for a Lowry Jones that corresponded to the same area that's circled on the map here. And Joe Vilari, our preserve manager and staff, had started working on this project and were trying to uncover the history of this corner of the preserve. And Patrick and Joe were introduced actually through one of the preserve's volunteers, Janice Stone, I believe. And through their inquiry into the Lowry Jones land patents in this section of the preserve, this has evolved into an ongoing partnership between VOF, Patrick and the Archaeological Society of Virginia. So this project took a site that was previously thought to be one individual cultural feature, turned it into a mapping project using archival records discovered by Patrick, and we brought out members of ASV and members of the public for several cemetery mapping field days, and it resulted in the map that we see on the right here. So we were able to tease out 4 individual cultural features from this project. So this is termed LJ Cemetery because before this cemetery mapping project that we conducted with ASV and Patrick, there was one headstone within this cemetery that was known to be engraved, and the picture is here on the left, and it says LJ 1857. And the dates of those land patents Patrick had been finding correspond to the time right before the death date on this headstone. So through our mapping project, we were actually able to identify 15 individual graves within the LJ Cemetery, which are shown on the right-hand side in this map here. And these are marked by headstones and footstones for each individual grave. And while we were doing this work, Patrick actually caught, I think it was by the trick of the sunlight, some engraving on another headstone. And upon closer inspection, we found that it contained quite a bit of information. So it read, child of Zachary Jones, and contained a death date of 1770. So this is very exciting for a number of reasons. We now have a first and last name to associate with this cemetery, with the presence of Zachary Jones and the land patents for Lowry Jones and the LJ 1857 headstone. We can start to assume that this might be the Jones family cemetery. And also a death date of 1770 is the earliest recorded headstone for Prince William County. So it's an exciting record in that respect. So as we worked through this cemetery field mapping day, we discovered 3 other sites, as I mentioned, and I'll bring this photo back up and this map back up. So this photograph is actually taken from one of those field mapping days where members of ASV are mapping individual headstones and footstones, which all the flagging, hopefully you can see it here, marks each individual headstone and footstone. So we were able to identify an area of disinterred graves through this mapping. So that's where someone was buried, later disinterred and removed from the site. And then another entirely separate cemetery that had 40 plus graves in it. And we're terming it now the Poplar Cemetery, as we haven't been able to find out more information on who was laid to rest in this particular cemetery. And then we also isolated a homestead foundation right within this complex. So through our partnership and through our work, we were able to identify 4 unique cultural sites out of what was previously thought to be 1. So with this, I'm going to celebrate, or we're going to celebrate together, Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which occurred yesterday. And we're going to talk about an oral history that came out of the mountains called Liza's Secret Legend of the Boron Mountains. So this story was recorded in 1937 and is told by William Lambert, who at the time was an older gentleman who was raised within the mountains. And he heard this story from his grandmother and noted that this story had been told in many other areas of the mountain and had been passed down from generation to generation, thus becoming a legend. So Liza's story originates around 1800 in a cabin known as Payne Place. And based on the location information in the story, it's right, we believe to be in this area that's circled on the map here. And as the story goes, Liz was an incredibly strong, fierce, independent woman who could fell trees and roll them down towards her cabin better than any man on the mountain. She killed several wildcats that still lived in the area, could be heard chopping wood every day in autumn and winter for her fireplace, and was the best weaver, took care of the sick and community members in need, and continued to prosper after the mysterious disappearance of her husband one winter. So in this particular retelling, she thrived after the passing of her husband, so much so that at the end of her life, she confessed to murdering him and burying him under the hearthstone in her cabin. So whether or not she was a real woman who lived within the Boron Mountains, or if she's truly a fabricated legend, this gives us an interesting picture about the women of the Boron Mountains. So if she's truly a legend, this story didn't come out of nothing. She's likely an amalgamation of characteristics of our Bull Run women. So perhaps it was one fierce woman named Lies, or the women throughout the mountain were slaying wildcats, chopping trees with a fervor, and taking care of their communities and offing their less than satisfactory husbands. So happy Women's History Month to everyone, especially Lies. And I think Barinaale is up now.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Thank you so much, Summers, for that amazing presentation thus far. Thank you for educating us about lies and what to do with our less than satisfactory partners. Like I mentioned in the beginning, just in case I know it's been a while since everyone's seen me, my name is Barinaale Dube, and I am the Cultural History Fellow turned interpreter here, not here, because we're not at the preserve right now. The Wi-Fi wouldn't be this good, but at the Boron Mountains Natural Air Preserve. So the first thing I would like to do is show you guys a little bit of our fellowship program overall. So here I am shown with my other fellows, myself up in the upper right-hand corner. Below me, we have Meredith Hart, who is our science fellow. Up in the upper left-hand corner, we have Annie Mickham, and she was our cultural history intern, specifically focusing on the Dawson. Below her, we have Michael Montalvo, and then in the middle, we have Kellen. Help me, Summers.
Kellen Hope.
Kellen Hope, yes. And so these were all the inaugural fellowship programs that came to be in the summer of 2019 last year. And so, like Joe mentioned, we were and still are operating in a pandemic. So a lot of some of our outreach motives and things like that were specifically Hampton, but we worked, I believe, in spite of that and alongside that to try and make some magic. So when I came on as the Cultural History Fellow, we had 3 specific goals. The first one was to organize the information that preceded the fellowship. So if you guys can see in this picture here on the right, it is myself, Patrick O'Neill, our beloved preserve archaeologist, and our fearless leader, Leslie Grayson, our deputy director. And like Summers mentioned, there is decades of cultural history work and information that had been collected prior to me. At the beginning of the fellowship, Patrick gave me a giant file filled with census records and land deeds and receipts and things of that nature. And so that was and still is one of my main jobs: organizing that information, making it accessible, making it just cross-referencing certain things, making sure everything's on the straight and narrow. So that was one of the first things that happened. And the second was to get the public involved with our research. One thing you've heard us say, and you'll continue to hear us say over the course of this presentation, is accessibility, right? How can we take this history that doesn't only belong to us and share it to not only the public, not only the local community, but the state of Virginia at large, or even the nation at large, depending on where this information goes. And so one of the ways I decided to try and share this information with the public was through a series of videos and blog posts. So the videos happen on social media, and every Friday I would have Fellowship Friday, where I would break down some of the narratives and some of the stories, some information I was coming across, and take people through that journey that way. Since we were in a pandemic and people couldn't come to the preserve and listen to me lecture or anything like that the way we usually would. And last but not least, a third pillar of the Cultural History Fellowship was to lay the foundation for future relationships. So not only do we want to increase diversity, inclusion, and equity in conservation in general, but we wanted to ensure that like the next Cultural History Fellow will be able to pick up this work and continue it in a very easy way, and work toward these marginalized communities having more autonomy in these natural spaces. And I say more autonomy in these natural spaces because one of my backgrounds is a lot with younger children. And so I worked in Northern Maryland, Harpers Ferry area, and a lot of these marginalized Black and brown children would tell me that, oh, the outdoors is a white people thing, like this is not my space, I can't do this. And we wanted to show that through this history, showing these Black people, these indigenous people, these Irish, all these different people groups, to show that historically this land is your land as well, and that you can find autonomy and comfort in these spaces. And so talking about equity as a non-negotiable, something that we always keep in mind, we're always working toward. The way I kind of frame the argument is that we borrow from biodiversity. I feel like nature teaches us a lot about how to interact with one another. There are different species of plants, animals, insects that all have different roles, live differently, behave differently, need different things to survive, but they're all able to interact pretty harmoniously in nature. Joe, our preserve manager, actually gave me an excellent example in orchids, and he told me that orchids often begin to emerge in winter and in early spring before the tree canopy leaves come out, while sunlight can still reach the forest floor in ample amounts. They put the sunlight into energy stores that last them through the rest of the summer, when the orchids are largely shaded out by other large plants, right? So we can see this this kind of exchange of power, exchange of attention happen in nature. And I feel like that is the same thing we do now, we set out to do with the Cultural History Fellowship. We, and myself personally, was trying to ask, how can we make Black history, Latinx history, Indigenous history, American history, because that is what it is, right? From an equity standpoint, we have to bring these information out and take the time and the care that was previously not given toward it, to put it on the pedestal that it deserves. But on a grander scale, in a long-term way, we want to integrate it and present it as American history. So what are some of the products of our persistence, or what kind of things came out of the Cultural History Fellowship last year? So like I said, we had bi-weekly social media interactions. So I had Time Travel Tuesday, where I would put certain like historical documents on the social media, and then Fellowship Friday, where I would do these educational videos. We were able to have the Virginia Department of Historic Resources come out and survey one of the still standing sites we have on the preserve. I'll zoom in for you. This is Aubrey Braun Linder, one of their employees, and she came to the preserve, and she was able to look through the house and date things like nails and the boards and the way the house was constructed to figure out when it was constructed. And now we're currently doing RELIC programming, which is really exciting, partnering with Prince William County libraries in that way. We were able to take oral histories, we had blog hosts, and I believe one of our most impactful and favorite parts, things that were born from the Cultural History Fellowship, was our community hikes. So the Cultural History Fellowship and the hikes in general grew and are still growing to heights that we couldn't have originally imagined, especially in the pandemic. And as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, we are all pictured with masks because we must wear masks. But so we wanted to take people literally through the lives of our research subjects. So Summers gave us an excellent geospatial analysis showing us specifically where all these people stayed on the mountain. And so we wanted to literally walk the trails that they walked, drive the roads that they drove, and kind of take people on this this chronological spatial tour that way. What originally started as 2 hikes has turned to now 7. They have been extremely popular. The public has really enjoyed it. And I believe that one of the reasons why they have been so popular, and I know that RELIC programming, especially the libraries in Virginia as a whole can relate to this, is that we don't have a lot of spaces left in our American society where people are not expected to pay. When we think about going to sit and study at a Starbucks, the implication is that you'll buy a coffee, right, or a pastry, and you're expected to pay for occupying in that space, right? But when you go to a public library, that's the premise, that there's no money involved. And that is one of the reasons why we love and we prioritize that the Boron Mountains National Area Preserve is an open, free resource to the local community and the public, because it is one of the last free spaces that people can just come in. There's absolutely no barriers in that sense to accessibility. And so not only does the cultural history hike kind of bring people together in that sense, even in a social distance way. It also helped us learn some cultural concepts of land ownership, right? What does it mean what did it mean in that time to own land, and what does it mean for us now? Like, what was previously privately owned land is now under the ownership of the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, which gives it now accessibility to everybody. And so that's one of the things that we're examining as we're going on this hike. And last but not least, as always, foundationally, increasing inclusivity. We had a score of different people attending our hikes. We've had people as young as 9 years old, and we've had people as old as 70, if I'm correct, Summers, on our hikes. And so it has really been amazing to see people come out and want to learn the Black history, but the broader American history of the Boron Mountains. So now I'm going to take you guys through some specific case studies, some specific information we've gotten out of it. And I'm going to preface and say, and this is what I usually say on my hikes, that I am no Rick Steves. I'm more of an Anthony Bourdain without the food. And again, I just want to say a big thank you to Patrick O'Neill. He's on the line now for doing the foundational groundwork, to Leslie Grayson for doing the foundational groundwork, to Karen White, who is the co-founder and director of the African American History Association of Fauquier County. She has been an invaluable resource, not only in a physical archival sense, but she has definitely been a mentor to me in this role as well. And also, just to give you guys a little bit more context, when I came onto the Cultural History Fellowship, my specific focus was Black and African American families, not only because of my academic background, but because of my personal background. So I am going to start with Hampton Coal. So I'm not going to go very deep into them, but I do want to kind of take you on a virtual version of kind of the hikes we've been giving thus far. So if you guys can see in the bottom right-hand corner, you see the LJ Cemetery, which is what Summers left off talking about. And now to get to where I'm talking about, we're going to move into the northwest section of the south section of the preserve, and you can see the Hampton Coal Homestead site and the Robinson's Quorum Cemetery. So Hampton Coal, and I have a census record from the Prince William County Census Record in 1860, and you see him. I'm going to get my laser pointer. You can see Hampton Coal appearing right here. And the census record is one of my most invaluable records I have in terms of this genealogical research. So you can see Hampton Coal listed as the head of the family. You see him at age 29. And this is the people who are under him in his household. So this is Lydia Elizabeth Cole, formerly Penn, Calvin Newton, and Hampton O'Berry, which is his wife and sons. So here you can see Lydia Cole is listed as being of Indian descent. So since this is, you guys can see this is script, census records were taken by hand, right? So a lot of the way you're perceived or recorded in the census record is solely contingent on how the census worker perceives you. Right now, in 2021, we know that Blackness comes in all different shades, all different colors. But then, if your skin was a little bit too light or the pattern of your hair was bigger curls than people associated with Black people, you could be listed as being of Indian descent or something else. And you're going to hear me say a lot. You're going to hear me say properly and probably and perhaps and maybe, because that is the nature of our work. We are filling out the corners of a puzzle. We have some corners, and even those corner pieces are missing, and we fill in pieces little by little in kind of a roundabout way. So this is just an example. Hampton Coal is one of my favorite figures, but I also feel very bad for him. I feel like he just went through a series of unfortunate events. Hampton Coal, his wife and his son end up dying within 3 days of each other of typhoid fever while he's working in Alexandria. So he just cannot catch a break, to be honest. To continue to illustrate this census record point, I wrote here on the side a census record that had a hot date later this evening, and I'll tell you why I wrote that. Because let's compare the script on this census record to the one before. This you can read pretty clearly. Even though I zoomed in more, this is like significantly more legible. And like I was saying about the point about the census worker, sometimes people's names could be misspelled or their place of birth could be recorded incorrectly, or their age could be recorded incorrectly, and it just depends. We cannot know right now the circumstances, and so I assume that even though the handwriting is beautiful, it looks a little rushed. So maybe he had somewhere really exciting to go that evening. Now, quickly, I'm going to move on to the Robinson family. So all the research I'll be discussing this evening is centered around a specific patriarch that I end up picking, right? And I end up picking this patriarch based on how much information I have access to, how many records I have access to. And because of the nature of society at that time, the landowners, the money holders, the most educated, the most employed were the men. So most of the records are going to be centered around them, with their wife and children and other female family members taking a very auxiliary role to them. So here we have Alfred Robinson, and Alfred Robinson is actually the father of who this research is kind of hinged on, which is Moses right here, if you guys can see my laser pointer. And as you can see on the census record, he's listed as the head of the family. We have his wife, Susan, and this census record corroborates the same thing. And so this is going back to my puzzle piece analogy, right? We have these two corner pieces, and now we can compare them and see, yes, we can confirm that Alfred Robinson was married to Susan and had this number of children. Just a little bit of census record education for you. Now, going on to this case in point about the Quorum family, there are over 10 either formerly enslaved or born free Black and African American families on the mountain. And I usually use the word Black to describe these families because of the diasporic implications that it has. Sometimes I use African American because when I think about it culturally and in a cultural sense, these Black people that were in America and were technically citizens, and prior to the Civil War due to the three-fifths compromise, didn't have like full humanhood, right? Could we really consider them Americans if they didn't reap any of the benefits, right? So we think about African American geographically, but not in a citizenship sense, if that makes sense. So Beverly Corm is who I centered in the Quorum research on, and he was born in 1898. And we don't specifically have a birth record for him because we found that the state of Virginia did not record birth records from the year about 1895 all the way to about 1920, depending on your race and what part of Virginia that you were born. And I actually learned this from Karen White, the co-director of and the director and co-founder of the African American History Association of Fauquier County, because that is how the AAHA came to be. She was trying to research her family history, and she found two of her grandmother's sisters, but didn't find her grandmother because her grandmother was born just as the birth record stopped being recorded. And of course, as we can logically make the assumption that any rule, any legislation, any policy that is enacted at a governmental level is going to affect different people groups in a different way, right? If you're already in an underrepresented, marginalized, oppressed community where a lot of care and attention and diligence is not paid toward you, these policies are going to affect you greater, right? So we can see white Virginians' births starting to be recorded as early as 1970, while we see Black Virginians, sometimes their births are not recorded until 1930, depending on what county they are. So Beverly Corm married a Robinson, which is another prominent Black family on the board, specifically in the south section of the Boron Mountains Natural Area Preserve. And we see these Black families not only intermarrying, but finding different ways to support themselves, taking on this community economics, right, to support one another. And so these are just some fast facts about Beverly Corm, but these pictures here on the right are of a house that is still standing on the preserve, and this is actually one of the stops we make on our cultural history hike. And so this is the inside of the house, which I actually went inside. Summers here is laughing because Joe and Summers understand that I am a city lady at heart, and I've really, done some heavy lifting to get comfortable in the outdoor space. but there were vultures nesting in there, and vultures seasonally nest, right, summers in the Quorum house. And so we had to wait for them to evacuate till we were able to go into the house. And then they told me that there would be snakes on the ceiling. So you can understand why I wasn't enthusiastic about crawling into a house with snakes on the ceiling, but I did it. And this is the inside of the house. And if you guys want to go to our social media, you can see I took a video from the inside of the house so you guys can get a closer look at what it looks like. So right here is an excellent example of a census record, and this specifically comes from, this is a Fauquier County census record. So I'm going to zoom into where the quorums are. And actually, I'll start at the top. So the census record gives us a lot of information. Now we have, we walk around with GPSs in our hands. The government can get information from us via our taxes, school records, immunizations, all these different kind of things. But at the time when those kind of things didn't exist, the census was a very big familial and bureaucratic resource to get the information about the population in the area. So we have place of abode here, we have name. So they will name the head of the household and everybody else in the family. And then as you can see in this next column, relation to the person, relation to the head of the family, right? We have home data, personal description, which will give you gender, age, things of gender, age, and marital status in that place. We have education. We have place of birth of the person, their mother, their father. We have, if you can read here, I hope this is zooming in enough, mother tongue or native language, which this is for the state of Virginia, so there weren't a lot of people from outside the county here. Citizenship, occupation and industry, employment, and whether they're a veteran, right? So we're gonna come down here. So if you guys can see, let me get I don't know if I can do it at the same time, but you guys can see where my cursor is. This is Beverly Corm right here. He's listed at the head of the family. So at the time that this census is taken, he is 33 years old and he's married to Mary Robinson, right? And he has his daughter Agnes, his daughter Mabel, his son William, and this is a case in point about the way census records could differ from point to point. Later, we see this son listed as Alfonso, and even on his death record and marriage record and World War II draft card, which I'll show you in a couple of slides, he's listed as Alfonso. But here, somehow the census worker changed Alfonso to Almorda. So this is one of those examples of how things can change that way. Also, his son Melvin is listed here. So we see their ages listed here. We see where they're born. And another good thing that the census record gives us is what kind of employment people had. So right now on this record, Beverly Corm is listed as being a laborer in the lumber mill, right? And this, I believe at this time, he worked at the Gaines lumber mill, if I'm correct. Patrick might correct me at the end. We'll also have questions and a big time for discussion, so please bear with me. So moving on, we don't find a lot of pictures of these Black families on the mountain for various number of reasons. The Boron Mountains as a whole was really removed from society. We learned later that they didn't get electricity until like 1960, while other places in the area got electricity decades before. But of course, like I said, any policy that exists, it's gonna affect marginalized and oppressed communities worse, right? So if the white counterparts on the mountains didn't have money or time or access to a camera, the Black counterparts were even less likely to have that access, if that makes sense. But here is a World War I draft registration card, and we get a picture of Beverly Corm that way. So at this time, he is 21 years old, as listed on this card. And his date of birth here is listed as June of 1896. So again, I'm always going to be referencing my puzzle piece analogy, right? This draft registration card shows that he was born in June of 1896. But if we go back to the census record, this is the 19, let me zoom in so I can read it. This is the 1930 census, and it lists him as being 33 years old. So this would put him as being born in 1897. So you see the roundabout way in which we collect information. But to give you a picture of Beverly Corm, let me zoom in for you guys. They ask a series of questions that I find quite comical on this draft registration card. So it asks if he's tall, medium, or short. It says short. It asks if he's slender, medium, or stout. He's medium. Color of his eyes, brown. Color of hair, black. And my personal favorite question, bald, question mark? No. So we get a very clear picture. We can kind of build an image in our mind of what Beverly Corm looks like off of these documents. And also ask, has he lost an arm, leg, hand, or both? It seems he has all his faculties and ligaments intact. So we're very happy for him in that sense. But Beverly Corm goes on to serve in World War I. And we corroborate this information because on later census records, when they ask whether or not you're a veteran, he marks yes and indicates World War I. So moving on, now we have and this is another very important resource we have in our research, which is death records, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, the state of Virginia was not recording birth records for a 2-decade span. So when we get to these death records many years later, they often go back in time in sort of a sense and explain or sometimes note when these people believe they were born or depending on where they get this information from. So I'm actually going to start with Beverly's father here, and Beverly was born to John and I believe Mary as well, if I'm correct. Let me find it. Yes, John and Mary Thomas Quorum as well. And Joe actually mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, if you remember, that there are other Black communities, specifically closer in this area of Virginia, and of course across the state as a whole, that we have kind of heard about, but haven't been able to make as good of a contact as we would like to the pandemic. But what I learned through my research is that, and through a presentation I was able to attend, was that there was a historically Black community called the Settlement, and it was settled along Carver, along Lee Highway, actually. And so if we go down to the bottom of this death record, we see that John Quorum was buried at Mount Pleasant. So John Quorum was buried at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, which is a historically Black Baptist church right down here off of, it was at Summers 29? Yes, Highway, actually 15. Yes. So I was able to see a picture of his tombstone at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. And unfortunately, Mount Pleasant Baptist Church was the victim of a white supremacy attack via arson in 2012. But we can see culturally how these Black institutions, such as churches or schools or community organizations, are able to hold records for their community members. And so if we scroll over to, and we can even see the difference in record keeping. So this place, so both Beverly and his father resided on the south section of the preserve that we know now for a certain period of time. But his father died in Fauquier County while, excuse me, I'm so sorry. It's not clicking. There we go. Zoomed in. And so both his father and Beverly Corm died in Fauquier County, right? But we can see the difference in time, right? We see that this is handwritten with script. Meanwhile, Beverly's is typed via typewriter and is a lot clearer and a lot easier for us to read. And so I encountered this same situation across all my research, right? Hampton Cole, being one of the first free Black people that occupied the mountain, there are certain records for him that I either wasn't able to come across or are harder to find multiple copies of, while Beverly Corm, who was born almost at the turn of the 20th century and passes away at the very end, we have a lot more records because we move forward in history and we see Black people not only gaining more autonomy in the state of Virginia, but in the country as a whole. And Beverly Corm is buried at Olive Branch Baptist Church, which is another historically Black church in the area. And so again, they hold the records and they eventually hold like their parishioners at the very end. And even piggybacking off of Summer's point of cemeteries as cultural sites, we see these Black people on the mountain either buried at these Black churches or actually on their homes, right? And these were the two safest places for them because they were, even, I believe even now, Emmett Till, his tombstone is there, it's riddled with bullet holes and all these kind of things. So we see that Black people are not even able to rest in death, right? So they tend to bury themselves on land that they know will be passed down to their descendants to ensure that they, in whatever sense you might conceptualize it, will be protected, or in this hallowed ground that are the churches. Okay. So this picture here is with myself, Karen White, and Patrick O'Neill at the African American History Association of Fauquier County. And like Joe mentioned, and like I mentioned, like we want to connect every dot in the state of Virginia eventually. But we're starting right now with AHA, and we're even in contact with the Oakesbury Guardian Foundation. And it was really exciting to find out that some of the work that we've been doing at the Boron Mountains Natural Area Preserve was a catalyst for the Oakesbury Guardian Foundation to try and look into some of their cultural history as well. And we're really excited about filling in some of these gaps of family members and things like that in terms of the settlement and Carver Road and all these other historically Black communities. So in a broader sense, why do we do and why do we hope to continue this work, right? So I spoke about 3 Black families tonight, right? The Quorums, the Robinsons, and the Coles. But like I said, there are at least 7 other families that we know of as of right now, Black families to be focused on. And we want to get, post-pandemic, we want to get local organizations and communities and schools out into the field and be able to do this work with us for them to enjoy the enthusiastic excitement that we feel when we get to stumble upon these new histories. And not most importantly, but what is a priority for us is to get the younger generation involved in conservation efforts. Like I said, like this land is their land as well. They can find autonomy in this place. Like even if they feel like the outdoors isn't historically or culturally their space, like we can tell them, no, like you have Black descendants, you have Hispanic descendants that were historically being as outdoors as possible. No electricity. I'm literally carving their lives out of the mountain because the Boron Mountains is a quarrying natural resource. Yes, Patrick just shouted out a lot of more important people that were part of this research as well. But that is really our goal. We want people to feel like they are a part of the narrative, that they could share in what's going on, and that they can, and maybe encourage them to look into their own family history, and just increase and fill in the already colorful background that is the Boron Mountains in Virginia as a whole. Alrighty. 1 second, let me.
Okay. So as we move forward and thinking about the message that Barinaale just shared with us, we are working at the preserve to provide this space for a diverse array of humans, both in the narratives that we tell and the amenities that we provide. But we also have to recognize that not everyone can come out and hike at the preserve and attend a guided educational hike for a myriad of reasons. And not everyone wants to come out to hike at the preserve or come to our space. So we're capturing all these histories and building all these narratives and providing them in this digital capacity. So this is an example here of a story map that is basically talking about the cultural history of the preserve at Boron Mountains, focusing on the research that Barinaale and others have conducted into our Black and African American history. And this will be an online format where visitors can virtually visit the preserve, learn about the history, and explore a map of the preserve. So this is really a highest level of accessibility that we can offer as we move forward in uncovering our history.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about. Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I just wanted to give you guys a kind of snapshot into our what I call our cultural information distribution medium, or Instagram. And so if you see my face pop up multiple times on the page, this is just to give you an example of what I was talking about in terms of Fellowship Friday, and even Meredith Hart, our science fellow, had Science Saturdays as well. And so this was just another way in which we are trying to make the preserve accessible to people near and far. I also had transcripts for my videos, so those who are deaf or hard of hearing could participate in what was going on as well. We also put all of these on our blog via our website so that people who are not social media inclined can access them as well. So that is, like someone was saying, a pillar of our research, and our work in a broader sense to ensure that everyone at all times has access to the information and making the equitable move to make things as easily accessible for everyone, right? Because we could just put it up on Instagram or just put it up on our blog post and say that our hands are done, but we are constantly seeking out ways to figure out like what is the most comfortable medium for people to access and working toward that. Okay. All right.
And lastly, as we continue in this work, and as we're moving forward, we've touched on this a few times, but we're continually identifying key partners for representation and diversity, recognizing that ourselves as staff may not be the best experts in this and may not be the most appropriate representative voice. So as Barinaale has identified, we've worked with the Afro-American Historical Association of Fauquier County, but we're looking to continue our efforts to broaden our partnerships and really increase representation for our diversely peopled past within the Boron Mountains. And with this, I think we're ready for questions. And thank you for everybody for hanging in there, even through some of our technical difficulties.
Be sure to unmute yourself if you have a question. And if you can't be heard, feel free to put your question in chat and we can read it.
I'll also put in here links for our resources that we've talked about, our website, our social media sites, and our blog as well. So I'll put those in the chat.
Actually, Summers, and if you could email those to me when when the recording for this is finished, I'm going to send this video. I'll send any links or anything you guys want to share.
Oh, excellent.
Joe had also sent me the foundation's latest annual report, so I'm going to include that. And so, just anything you want me to share, send along. I'll send to everybody who registered for this program. So. Okay,
great. Thank you so much, Kirk. That would be wonderful.
Hi, this is Jim Mitchell. I'm just wondering, will there be a link to the previous presentation that your resident historian did about a month ago?
Yes, I think actually Kirk posted it earlier in the chat, but I can repost it here.
Sure. Or I can send it again.
If you could email it with the rest of the information, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Kirk, are these presentations, how long will they be on the YouTube channel?
I have not been told that they will ever be removed. I mean, you know.
So I can be seen forever.
But you know.
Perpetuity.
Yes, in perpetuity. There's no end point that I've been given. So as long as we support it, you know.
Okay. Well, Barinaale and Summers, I think you did a fantastic job this evening. I'm not signing off, but I just thank you very much. I think you expressed what we've all been working for. And Summers, you're right. We don't know that we are the voice and the people. I'm glad that you and Barinaale are taking some of this on, because you are much more articulate and your words. I have it up here, but it is so difficult for me to put it out there. That's why when we go walk and let's go take a hike, because I can show you what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to describe that to other people. So I think you both did a fantastic job, and I appreciate your public outreach and all this.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It certainly takes a village. So there's been a lot of key partners that have gotten us, Barinaale and I, to this point. So thank you to everyone who has contributed to the project.
Sherry, Dr. Huerta.
Oh, it's just Sherry tonight.
Okay.
I'm just fascinated. Thank you so much for this presentation. It is amazing to know how much history and space and cultural meaning there is on these lands and on the mountains there. I guess something that is just amazing to me, I'm not a native Virginian, but seeing how fast that the area has been developed, that this land that you have so many cultural artifacts and cultural remnants still existing there, particularly the cemeteries. I noticed in one of the census records that the family was there as renting the property, not owning the property. Is there a sense that this was at one time maybe one large tract of land, or that it was never really, processed or developed over in any way, that was kind of kept as sort of unclaimed lands, or that it was primarily set aside for a Black community? What is your sense of how the land was able to stay so pristine all this time?
Do you want to take that one?
You want me to jump in on there?
We might throw this one to Patrick a little bit,
Okay.
but I'll start with that. I think for the most part, a lot of the Boron Mountains in our earlier history that we've been discussing tonight was held within two landowners, William Roach and then the Chapman land for the most part. But also, we should note that the Boron Mountains themselves are not very ideal land, I guess not very prosperous. So on both sides of the Boron Mountains, there's very rich agricultural farmland. So that's really the prime real estate. So the Boron Mountains themselves, if you ever come and hike, it's very rocky. It's primarily quartzite and saprolite, and those both support very acidic soils, which ultimately means not great for crop production. So we actually see that it's a very depleted land and not very prosperous. So I think if you were in the Boron Mountains, you ended up there because you could afford it, or you could be there. And we see that most people have left by the late 1900s, like 1960s, 1970s. Most people have left the heart of the Boron Mountains to get to greener pastures, so to speak. But Patrick, do you have any extra information to add?
Well, so like the Chapman of the south part of the preserve, and that's what we're talking about there. The vast majority, over 50-60%, was Chapman land. And that part went to the Blight family. The Blight family were descendants of the Chapmans. And they lived, I want to say, until the 70s or 80s. And it went into preservation in 1977, I believe, is when that 600, 700 acres was sold. And so underneath them, it had been in one family since the very early 1800s. But the Chapmans had purchased several tracts. Now, following that was hell, because lots of deed books are missing in the county. Now, you can't just say that the Yankees burned them. We don't know that, okay? But the fact is, I even kidded to Don Wilson. I said, I think that John Chapman, when he was right before the Civil War, I think he went to the county, and any deed book that had his name in it, he went and took it, because every time I was looking. But anyway, the point is that they have a large area, and there are farmsteads. We have found a couple of them that probably go back to the earlier settlers. The Fagan, we found Francis Fagan's tombstone. He comes out there in 1748, 49. We found Lowry Jones's dad, Solomon Jones. We found their cemetery. That was the one of Zachariah Jones. Solomon Jones gets that land in 1749. So these areas are out there very early, but they're getting absorbed by these other large tracts. Well, as Summers says, the area is not conducive to plowing. And if you can't get a plow in there, you're not going to be able to wholesale destroy these farmsteads and these cemeteries, okay? Like you would within lots of Prince William County, Fairfax County. All these places get bulldozed or they get developed. Now, that being said, however, the fact that the Virginia Outdoor Foundation has put so much in preservation, then people can't go build a McMansion up on the side of the hill, because they're going to put their McMansion right there where these sites are because they put their cabin the best logical location. So they're still there because of all this working together. And now, in your question about whether or not the land was set aside for this Black community, no. What we don't know yet, and we may never know, is exactly why there. However, as Don Wilson pointed out, and I think Karen White as well, the Boron Mountains area there, they're low mountains, but there are protection against everybody east of there. Okay. And we're talking about Washington, D.C. once it starts being developed, or just everybody else. And there's a thought process. Eugene Shields even brought this up, that the Bull Run Mountains could have been an active corridor for some of the Native Americans, in particular, some of the Cherokees that are coming up from North Carolina, escaping to the north instead of having to get moved out west. And they also know that the Bull Run Mountains and these areas, because they're not the big mountains, but there's enough for people to walk in there, that they're using that as part of the Underground Railroad, and other slaves, as they're escaping before and during the Civil War, they're coming through there. Now, we know that Hampton Cole is the first person that purchases one of these tracts in 1856 from William Roach, okay? And we don't know why. We know that Hampton's father and mother were more than likely free. Whether they were freed or whether they were born free, we don't know, because you get back in the early 1800s and we might stumble across a court record or something like that, but who knows? But we know that Hampton is born free, okay? And he buys this land from William Roach. And then the others are buying them. He's the only one before the Civil War that buys it, of these tracts that we are looking at. And again, as both Barinaale and Summers say, it's going to expand, and we may find that what we thought was a concentrated area is part of a larger area, and we can fill in a different time frame, okay, of that. And that's what they're doing. We're not just looking at the Virginia Outdoor Foundation land. I mean, now we are, because we can look at that, okay, but it's part of everything else. But we do know that they're coming out there because of the stone, because these other people from the 1880s to 1920s, they're getting little 5 acres, 4 acres, 2 acres, 10 acres, and it's right on the edge. And when you look at the deeds, many of them say for mineral resources or stone, and that they're supposed to be, one of the edges has got to be on the bluff edge, because they want that stone that's right there on the bluff edge, and that's where the quarries are, right along that bluff edge. So Hampton is kind of an enigma, but the others that come up there, like Enoch Helm and Eli Hall, they are there already before they buy the land. So they, like Enoch Helm said, Benjamin Newton says, I'm buying the land, and the house which I've been living on is supposed to be the center of the land that I buy. Whether or not they're renting, leasing, or the landowner is letting them squat out there, don't know. But there's lots of potential. But because if we don't get a hold of those oral histories, and that's why it's so great that they're talking to the Quorum family and the Hall family, those descendants, because they have a little few stories. And they're like Liza, that's there's or Liz, I guess is that how you say it.
Lies, Liz, open to interpretation.
But there's going to be some things out there that may put this together in a great context. But it's great to have so much inclusiveness in all this, because I love being able to go up to people and say, do you know this? No. Oh, well, let me tell you what I found out, because that's fantastic.
If I may just
Janice?
interject one thing. I just think it's really fascinating that the mountains themselves, the Bull Run Mountains, the tracks that we're looking at here, the Chapmans were married. One of them actually married into the same family as George Washington, married a brother of George Washington, founder of our country. and they were instrumental in part of the revolution. But at the same time, we have this deplorable history of slave treatment throughout, and we have all strata of society represented right here on Bull Run Mountains. Kind of fascinating.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
big shout out to Mother Leathercoat for Women's History.
Oh, yeah.
There was a question from Pat Cleary by chat, and he may not be able to ask this himself. He was asking how hard will it be to get into the 1600s and before. I'm not sure who that is for.
Okay,
well, I think
I'm
one
gonna
of the,
pitch it to Patrick. Yeah, I think.
so what is Pat? Are you still on here?
He was. Yes,
Yeah,
he is.
Pat's still here. He just
But I
doesn't have his
don't know if
mic
he's
on.
got his mic on.
So can you unmute? What I want to ask you is exactly what do you mean when you say that? Are you talking about into the archives, into archaeology, or just trying to find out earlier components to the area than the 1700s, trying to get back in the 1600s? Is that your question?
Yeah, archaeologically, I think.
Okay.
Because you're talking about this thoroughfare that goes back centuries and centuries.
Right. And so that's one of the things that Mike Johnson was looking at. He was trying to find out the Native American component because he works down at Smith Mountain Lake, and that's the same type of thing where there's a gap in the mountains and they can go back way early. I mean, we're talking early, okay? Back in the Paleo times, okay, before the Archaic period. And so he wanted to know whether or not that occurred here at Bull Run. Now, the problem with the one at Bull Run, Smith Mountain Lake has there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been disturbed. So and when the water in the lake reservoir goes down, they can just see this stuff exposed everywhere. Well, at Bull Run Mountain, you got the I-66, you've got the railroad, and you've got all the incarnations of the mills over time. And so in that area, and that's right at the gap itself. So he found a lot of information about the Native Americans in there, but some of it is in disturbed context, but he wants to do some more, and there's plenty of areas where they could look. Now, as far as contact or 1600s, the earliest land patent in this area that we're talking about doesn't come until 1728. And even then, that one was never proven. It had to be repatented about 10 years later. So anything before 1728, it's going to be almost non-existent. Doesn't mean there's nobody out there, but they're not claiming any land. Okay. Now, that being said, you know that explorers, you know that people are going out there, but again, they're probably going and camping where these people are building later. And so we'd have to be very lucky to be able to find something. However, what we're getting ready to do is a very ambitious project. And I'm going to put Joe on the spot here, that he said that he's going to get some VOF employees out there to help us. We want to do a pedestrian survey of the South Preserve to flesh out more of the things that we have found, fence lines, foundations, and cemeteries, to see if we can find more features. And as we do that, especially when we go up in the mountain there, we may find some things. It might be that they're logging related. It might be that they're quarry related. It also could be that they're early settler or explorers related. We don't know. Sometimes it might be the result a tree fell over and we can look around the roots and see what was in the tree roots. But I would not say that we wouldn't find anything before the 1700s. But boy, I think it would actually be just kind of lucky to be able to find it, because I think if there's something there, it's probably around where the mill was, because that's the best place right there by the mill. They've got that rock formation there that protects it from getting wiped out when it's flooding, and I think that's why it was built specifically right there. I want to say 36. There's a couple of times when it flooded really big, and there's one in the 60s or 70s, because there's one time when they have a color photograph of the mill And the water coming up to that stone formation right north of the mill, or right west of the mill, is violent with the water. And that's right where it turns and goes under 66. The water is standing over by the mill, the foundation of the mill, but it's calm. And you can take that visual and understand back in the 1740s when they were building that mill, why they put it right there. You know, is because they didn't want to get it washed out. And Broad Run was going to wash out because those mountains are not letting any water sink in. So when it rains, it's coming down that mountain. Yeah.
It seems to me from the presentation I just heard of all this documented evidence of people liking to live there in the 1700s and the 1800s that it would make sense to me.
Well, but here's the deal. So the early patents are in those lower spots. They're not the mountains themselves. They're down in those lower spots. And we find as late as, I want to say, 1820, that was when one of the last patents was made on unclaimed land. And they used to call it wasteland. Wasteland was nobody really wanted that. You want to get some land? There's some wasteland out here, but that's up on the mountain. You're not going to get anything for it. You know, you can have it, you know. And so those early patents are going there. And that's why the mill was built so early. They knew they could tap that power. But that mill is one of the first industries out there. That mill is out there when there's nobody else out there.
Okay.
And that mill was actually, the first mill built was the upper mill, which was mostly used for crushing limestone originally. And
Right.
the second mill, the one we see today, is the lower mill, which was used as a grist mill, grinding grain primarily. We do have on the northern section of the preserve what's called now the Creel House, but probably should be called some other name. It's a stone house up there, and there were some pit surveys that were done several years ago there, and we did find points from, not actual points, but flakes from where rocks had been worked by Native Americans, and they were not local stones. They were brought from over in the Shenandoah area at the time. So that house property itself was actually surveyed by George Washington back in 1774 for John Mundy, who was buying it at the time. So there was a lot of activity going on prior to this being the Americas.
Thank you.
No, thank you for asking questions.
Anybody else? This was a fascinating presentation. It was just amazing. I'm probably gonna have questions about the GIS aspect of this. I don't want to, you know, belabor it now, and it's your expertise more than the tools, you know. But there's a lot there I'd like to know more about next time I get a chance to talk to you all. Joe, did you want to say anything in closing?
No, just thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate it. And I guess Patrick, we'll have all the people you need out there. So I'm all right
All
being
the
put on the
people
spot.
I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we got Summers, we got Barinaale, you have me. What else do you need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some
Exactly.
sturdy legs to get up the mountain. That's what I need.
We'll carry you up.
Janice is going to have to carry me up there like she did that first time we met there.
Oh,
Yeah, I can show you some of those old trails and foundations that you probably don't know about.
Barinaale and Summers, I get both of you. This was just fantastic. Thank you so
much. This is a wonderful opportunity, and we appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight. This is wonderful.